Welcome to the National Widowers Organization monthly webinar, where we seek to provide grief support for those who have lost a spouse, a partner, or any significant loved one. The NWO is a nonprofit group bringing men together in grief. Our organization is led by experts in loss, many of whom are widowers, and others who have grieved significant deaths. The NWO offers free of charge resources, including articles, blogs, books, peer-to-peer support, and more to help men during this very difficult time and beyond. As men, we don't have to go through a loss alone, whether it be the loss of a spouse, child, parent, friend, or sibling. I'm NWO board member Ken Levy. I lost Sheila, my wife of 18 years, to inflammatory breast cancer when she was just 49. Our topic tonight is making self-care a priority after loss. Tonight's program explores the importance of self-care during a grief journey. Following a loss, it takes effort to find the sanity and sense of well-being. How do we begin to get there? We'll cover practices of the body, speech, and mind, the way they interrelate in healing and personal well-being. The workshop will conclude with 15 minutes of Q&A, where all are encouraged to post questions or issues to our two panelists. Tonight's life experience contributor is Will Haywood. In April 2020, at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, Will lost his mother to the virus 5 days after being diagnosed with a low pulse oxidation level. Will had to pivot immediately from the loss of his mother to care for his father. His father, suffering from the effects of Lewy body dementia, was diagnosed with symptoms of pneumonia, born as a result of COVID-19, just a few weeks after his wife's death. After treatment at Research University, he was transferred to hospice care, where he died 6 months after his wife. Will works for an engineering association in the areas of corporate, strategic, communications, and governance. Tonight's educator is Matthew Morse. Matt is a psychotherapist in New York City. Here now is panelist Will Haywood.
Thanks so much, Ken. Thanks for having me here at NWO, and thanks to Adam and to Matt for attending. Thanks to Frederick for the invitation. I've been reading a little bit about this organization, what you do. I think it's amazing and excellent resource for men. You touched on my bio a little bit. I'll talk a little bit about my background. Born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. I'm a local guy. Oldest of 3 children. Parents were born in Central America, born in Panama. Emigrated many years ago, and I was born here, as were my brothers. I'm a divorcee is the word, correct word. And my brother, I work in as you mentioned, the association for a professional engineering association. My brother works in media, and my youngest brother works in mental health for Bellevue. And we've had a pretty normal upbringing. Not a whole lot to parse there. I will pivot to 2020, when we've all had a crazy 2020, but when everything sort of fell apart for our little family structure and for our lives, for that matter. My youngest brother, who worked at Bellevue, coming down with a bit of a fever. They were talking in March 2020, and we really hadn't given the whole thought of COVID in our country a whole lot of consideration back in early to mid March 2020. But he was coming down with a fever, and I was told by my first brother that we wouldn't be able to visit him, come see him, because he had some sort of a fever. And again, given the fact that we hadn't given a whole lot of consideration to COVID-19. I wasn't worried about his condition. My parents were fine. Everyone was pretty healthy, took good care of attending doctor visits, et cetera, et cetera. I spoken to my mother, I believe it was about April 5th, 2020, I had a quick phone call, and she sounded really, really groggy. And so I said, you know what, I'll catch up with you the next day. She said, okay. Fast forward to 2 days later, April 7th, I get a call from my brother stating that my mother was having a really, really excruciating back concern, and that she wouldn't go to the hospital at that point, and that my interference was needed. As the oldest, I kind of take pride in being able to get certain things done in a quick manner for the family. So I just hopped in a car and drove down to Brooklyn. I currently live in Manhattan, and drove down to Brooklyn, whereupon I was able to see my mother in a condition that I had not been familiar with at any point. She appeared to be down about 10 pounds, a bit disoriented. And so we had never suspected COVID as an issue in early April 2020. We still didn't know what it was. So after a failed attempt to bring her to a standing position from a sitting position, and hearing that my father say that, she just spent time sleeping all the time, we called an ambulance, at which point they've examined her and saw that she had a pulse oxidation level of 80. Now, that didn't mean anything to me before, but 80 is pretty low. Where we're sitting now, we're probably in the area of 90. We're all in the area of 96 to 100. 80 is pretty bad. She was taken to a local hospital in Brooklyn that day, April 7th, 2020, and was later diagnosed a few hours later with COVID-19. We were informed that she was responding great to the oxygen rebreather mechanism that she was on, and that she could be released with some medicine over the next couple of days. And those days became longer and longer and longer for our family. My father, who, as you mentioned, Ken, was suffering from Lewy body dementia, wasn't informed that she had suffered from COVID, or she was suffering from COVID. We thought it best to keep that information from him. We didn't want to upset him, especially at his age. And my brothers and I took turns in coming to assist my father. And there's so much you don't know about them when you don't live with them on a daily basis. And that he, his water intake, his fluids intake, his intake of medicines like carbidopa to manage the dementia aspects of his illness. Those days just became longer and longer and longer. And towards the end of that week, we were informed that if my mother didn't improve, that she would be put on a respirator. That certainly caught our attention, because at that time, if we were all following the news, people who were going on to respirators were quite often not faring well. So, this was a huge source of worry and anxiety for me at that time. And, my father's seemed to be just spiraling downward. Perhaps his body was producing chemicals that would just make his condition worse. Anxiety, who knows? We're not quite sure. I do remember telling my brother on Easter night that if my father had been suffering any of the effects of Lewy body dementia, that he shouldn't call me, because my brother had gotten into a habit of calling me about my father at the same time we were trying to manage the situation with my mother at the hospital. And if you recall, in those days, there was no regular access visitation. We're talking the very beginning of the pandemic, where access was unheard of. So I had said to my brother, look, don't call me. I'll if there's anything going on with my father, I understand. This is a long-term, Lewy body tends to be a long-term illness with lots of symptoms like sundowners, where one of the effects of Alzheimer's, where people who are suffering become a different person. I can remember falling asleep, waking up just after 12 and checking my phone, seeing a message from my brother. And I pretty much knew that at that point, she was gone. And he informed me of that. I had the very difficult task of informing my younger brother that our mother had passed away, listening to the sounds of grief on the other end of the phone, calling friends, and after 1 a.m. to inform them of what happened. And the next days were filled with just enormous sadness. I had informed my father the following morning that his wife of 50 years had passed away, and first time I'd ever seen him cry over anything at all. We're guys that were stereotypical guys, and we don't show that much emotion as is the stereotype. But he cried and went to bed. And the next few days were filled with informing family and making calls after calls after calls, to the point of extreme raspiness in my throat, and just trying to manage and pivoting to my father and his care. There were not a lot of available tests at that point. And now you can just go over to a box and get a rapid test. That didn't exist in April and May 2020. So I can remember going with my brother and going to almost a fortified military type of environment in Brooklyn to get a test run by people covered in hazmat suits, because we wanted to make sure that my father didn't catch this. Unfortunately, he did catch it, and we were able to tell that something was wrong through his respiratory distress. I'm not sure how that all works, but we tested negative. He tested positive, and we brought him to a hospital, like I said, a research hospital in New York City. A few weeks later, a few weeks after my mother had passed. So things were starting to, I wouldn't say loosen up, but there's a different sort of point of view in terms of access to information, access to video, being able to see your relative in a state. They did a good job in treating my father, but I don't know the effects of COVID on his Lewy body, and they didn't either, what effect that had on him. He had many moments of removing tubes from his mouth, feeding tubes, things of that sort, after the sun goes down, because it's one of those effects of Alzheimer's. And we were faced with a tough decision as to whether we would bring him home with a feeding tube on his side, which which would be surgically inserted, and which we are pretty sure he would have found a way to remove, and that feeding would have had to have been conducted by a professional in the healthcare field. Or we could bring him to hospice, where they could see his remaining days. Feeding, as many people might know, is one of the key components, or lack of feeding is one of the key components of transitioning from being a functioning person to perhaps death. And he died 6 weeks later. He died 6 weeks later, one day after my mother's birthday. I was hoping that he would not have passed on May 24th, because we would forever link his passing to my mother's birthday. And I held on for one more day and passed away on the 25th. Never had all three adult guys, me and my brothers, cry at once, but we had an opportunity to talk to my father on video. and explained to him that we were going to be okay. And, it's a feeling of being an orphan to some degree, but we explained that we were going to be okay. And we proceeded with our estate planning and funeral plannings and all of that sort of thing. A friend immediately called me. I'm pivoting to self-care. A friend immediately called me and said, you know what, I think you should go talk to somebody. You should go to a group counseling scenario because this was very much a traumatic, almost inexplicable amount of grief to handle in such a short time. It's not that we were even able to have our father for another few years, a few weeks later. So I did listen. We grew up in a kind of family where we didn't like to talk much about our, I see I froze there, not talk much about our feelings, especially in an organized setting such as this. But having been divorced, I've done a little bit of it, and there was no hesitation on my part, nor my brother, any of my brothers, the one who works in mental health, or my first brother. He found a group on his own. I then connected with a group, which is where I met one of our counselors, Maria, and I was able to learn and talk and grieve along with people who were in a similar situation as we were, people who had lost their parents to COVID. It was certainly helpful. It was something we looked forward to every Tuesday at 5 o'clock. The assignments, the camaraderie, not that we were all the best of friends, but just knowing that there were other people out there in 2020 and 21 who had undergone similar experiences that we had. It's one of the ways I took care of this. I certainly wouldn't want to have been a person who would have gotten to a fender bender, not having had any structural support, and have those emotions come out in some unseeming fashion. What do I do? What did I do? What do I do for myself as the anniversary is approaching? We're talking in a few weeks. It will be 3 years. I've been fortunate, and I know we don't all have this, but I've been fortunate to have a great group of friends who supported me and sending meals and calling me and speaking to me. And I must have talked the ears off of so many of my friends, not realizing that I was doing that. And just talking about family and the times we were in, and my parents, and that kind of support is just invaluable. Anybody who's going through anything, if you have a really good friend or set of friends, and it's not a comfortable place to be in. Death is not a very comfortable place to discuss with other people. They either shy away, and I've had people shy away, but then I've got a number of friends that are very, very, very invaluable, and just being there and listening. When I think about it now, and I thought about it in 2022, I feel so fortunate to have had them. And I do things that, as things eased, I do things that I enjoyed. So somewhat to some limits, social dancing with friends. I engage in that. Travel. I do, once we've been able to travel, I got back to some of that in mid 2021 with care. I'm combining some of this next week and going on a trip that combines my social dance with my travel. There's I said to a friend that I feel a bit of heaviness this time of year. Spring's a time for renewal and allergies and all of that good stuff. But thinking about it, February, I started feeling a bit of heaviness hit me. But I understand it and accept it now better than I did a year ago, better than I did a year before that. it's kind of like winning a bad lottery. I don't know any friends that have lost a parent, much less both parents, during this time. And the question of why us comes up to me. But I think I try to honor them, and we all try to honor them. Me and my brothers try to honor them by going on and taking everything one day at a time. So that's it. That's in a nutshell. It's as I get closer to April 12th, I know the heaviness will be there, and I like to go out to the cemetery and spend 10 minutes once a year on the anniversary. Well, twice a year, once on each of their anniversaries, 6 weeks apart. But it's a process.
Thank you, Will. I can't even imagine in the middle of all of the chaos of the pandemic to be dealing with something so profound as to have two parents passing. Thank you for sharing your story with us. I'd like to turn the discussion over to tonight's educator, Matthew Morse. Matt is program coordinator for the Center for Good Mourning and staff bereavement support at Arkansas Children's Hospital. After studying philosophy in college, Matt spent time studying Tibetan Buddhism in Nepal, India, and Japan. Returning to the US, he forged a career in journalism for 15 years. In 2008, while working through professional and personal losses, he trained at an interfaith spiritual counselor, a chaplain, at Mount Sinai Hospital. Matt worked at Calvary Home Hospice for 6 years as a spiritual counselor and bereavement counselor. He holds an MA in clinical counseling from Fordham University. Matt, over to you.
All right. Can you guys hear me? Everything's good?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Well, thank you, Ken, and thank you, Will, for your heartfelt talk. That is overwhelming to have both parents die, and during the mass pandemic, the mass trauma of the pandemic. So it's where to go, what to do. Luckily, you did the right thing and you sought other people, because the enemy of grief is isolation. And during the pandemic, that was all too common. People weren't able to see other people, but you were young enough and sophisticated enough that you could hop on Zoom and access resources, and it was very brave and intelligent of you to enter a grief group, because we're hurt in our relationships, but we also heal in our relationships. We're hurt by losing, but we also gain through reconnecting. So similarly here at Men's Grief Network, it's very good that all of you are here banded together, helping one another. It's a grief and community as a healer. It's good. It's ancient, way pre-Freud, way pre-1900, goes back thousands of years. One could say, even in the Western tradition, that the Iliad and the Odyssey were recited to groups of combat veterans as a way of healing and bringing people together. So that's always gone on. It's good. It's continuing to go on. So I guess one thing I'd like to talk about is this topic, self-care, and Will did many great things for self-care. He connected with friends, his brothers, as well as now, and then the grief group, also social dance, travel, and then he has these beautiful rituals that he plans on doing once a year where he'll visit. So those are all forms of self-care. Now, the way I see self-care, it's a very broad term. I mean, in common glossy magazine parlance, we think of, just, physical self-care, but self-care also involves the mind and the spirit and the energy, our internal health. So the way that I look at grief and challenges, trauma also, is that we're oriented in one way, we're connected, things are set, and then we get hit sideways and we're disoriented, we're made dizzy, our bearings are lost, we don't have our normal connectors and balance, our proprioception is messed up, emotionally and otherwise. And so the goal is to get back to connection with other people and to reorient, to find a new balance. And And we can reconnect with many things, with other people and with nature. And also, but ultimately we have to reconnect with our own heart, our own basic sense of basic goodness and sanity. Because obviously when we're first going through grief, we feel a little, sometimes we feel like we're going a little crazy. So we want to get back to our baseline state, or maybe even better, maybe we'll grow through our grief journey. Everyone's different. Each journey is unique. There's no one way to grieve. So like Will's way is one way there, but I'll point some other ways too. And the thing that I tell people grieving, I was a grief counselor, a bereavement counselor at Calvary for years, and still work with grieving people, is when I first meet them, I always suggest two things: gather your support network, your people, family and friends. And some people that you thought would support you won't be there for you, and some will. And they'll be there in different ways. Some will be really good at listening, emotional, they'll presence, and others will be, helping you with your to-do list of all the things you need to do. And others are just take your mind off it and go have fun. So we need a vacation. Grief is hard work. We need a break from grief too. And so they always say, gather your support network. And the other thing is tune into your native coping mechanisms. By native, I mean your natural coping mechanisms, the things you've been doing since you were probably in high school, if not earlier, to find health and meaning. And that might be, jogging or going to a place in nature. It might be a museum or art or listening to music. So gather, become aware of those and use them intelligently. Don't listen to the songs that aren't the right medicine at the right time. Sometimes you can't listen to sad songs with lyrics. You can listen to, you need something to inspire you at times. And other times you want to tune into that sadness and go into it, lean into it, as they say, scour the heart if that's what you need to do. Or you don't have to. So I thought I'd briefly just tell, the last time I went through grief was 2011, and it wasn't a death. It was a combination of piling on of stressors and losses. That included the death of two close friends who were my age at the time. I was in my late 40s. I was 48. And I had one friend who died by suicide, horrific death out of nowhere. And another one who died by a sudden heart attack. So those two kind of hit me. And then I was summarily fired or let go from my job. I helped found a magazine. I got cut out during the Great Recession. So my baby that I'd helped birth kicked me. And then last but not least, I had some troubles in my marriage. My marriage fell apart. Basic, what they call a betrayal trauma. I don't know if you want to call it trauma, but anyway, those four things were really, really hurt me. And I was deeply in deep grief. And for me, every grief I've had is different. That's what's funny. And I'm sure Will could tell us too. The way he grieved his divorce was different from the way he grieved one of his parents and then two of his parents. And each time it's different. And so this particular grief was very, I was frozen in fear. It was defined by fear. I was frozen in fear. And so it was the way I went about healing myself wasn't necessarily through emotional exuberance, evocative grief. It was a more instrumental grieving process. There's instrumental or head grieving, and then there's evocative or intuitive heart grieving. And most of us are a combination of the both, and depending on the loss, we'll lean one way or the other. In this case, it was very, very. I'm not going to say cerebral, but it took a lot of consciousness to work with it. So there were 10 things that I did to get myself to reorient myself, and I went into my native spiritual practice, Tibetan Buddhism. I took refuge in that more deeply than I had. I gathered my closest friends, high school friends, college friends, buddies from work. I threw myself into exercise. Exercise was huge for me. Yoga, jogging, weightlifting, because exercise, when the endorphins would flow afterwards, at least for half an hour, I'd feel quite good. Now, that it wouldn't last necessarily, but I had a little glimpse of well-being, physical exuberance and well-being. And the fourth thing I did is I found a good private therapist. I took some searching, but I found someone that I had some overlap with, a male therapist who shared my spiritual perspectives, and we worked together for a long time, a year or two, 3 years actually. And the fifth thing I did is I joined a study group. It was like a group, but it was a Dharma study group, like a spiritual study group. That was really nice. Once a week, we'd get together. I'd be with other people. I made new friends. The sixth thing is I reached out to a couples counselor. My wife and I went to a couples counselor. We're still married, so that was helpful. And number 7 is I read a lot of therapy books, some self-helpy and some deeper. And it's a legitimate form of therapy, reading self-help books. It's a organized thought, and it normalizes what you're experiencing, and it gives you hope. And we need hope. Humans need hope, especially when we're grieving. We need that hope. And so bibliotherapy. And number 8 was journaling, scriptotherapy, we sometimes call. I did a lot of writing to get things out of my obsessive head and onto paper, and then I could burn the paper if I wanted, or just throw it away. But I did a lot of writing. And number 9 was I found this new group of friends through a friend, and they were all music aficionados, and we went on these buddy road trips upstate to New York State, and we also out to Colorado, Boulder, Red Rocks, and that was great. It was good fun, just helping, supporting one another. And there, we would play around with, in minor amounts and safe amounts, of some recreational drugs that were quite useful at the time for me. MDMA among them, which is currently being it's under study now to help people with PTSD, and it'll in a few years, most likely it'll be one option. There are many options in the grief journey. So those are some of mine, and I that I worked. So once again, I was disoriented, and then to reorient myself, I used all this grab bag of techniques and systems and human support. And it took a lot of curiosity, but it helped. Now, as a therapist, what you do is you meet the client where they're at. So you would meet the client, and you validate and affirm what they're experiencing, and then you help them tune into their native coping mechanisms, and then help to keep them curious and prod them a little and open them up so that they maybe try new things and stay flexible and creative. And usually I recommend each person needs to find out their own practices of the body, the speech, and the mind. And by mind, I mean mind, heart, not just a cognitive mind, but the larger mind. But the body practices of the body could include exercise, clean diet, getting good sleep, keeping a clean and organized house. Cleanliness is got next to godliness, as Grandma said. Making beautiful things or cool things, woodworking, tinkering. Maybe you're into sculpture, painting, gardening. These are all practices of the body that are forms of self-help. And then there's self-help that's works with the speech and breath, with inspiration, and that would include music, both passive and active, not just listening, but also playing, singing, even if it's just in the shower, very healing. Mantra, if you're inclined that way. Art is a practice of inspiration. It's going to see the beautiful things, and nature, of course, will wake us up, attune us. And breath work. A lot of us these days, we're into breath work through pranayama, through holotropic breathing, or Wim Hof method. These are very, very healthy, useful things. And last are the practices of the mind or heart. And of the three, that's the most important. So we need to tune into our native wisdom tradition. For me, it's Buddhism, but for you, it might be agnosticism or existentialism or Judaism, Christianity, All these things totally legitimate. These are stoicism, totally legitimate. Whatever speaks to you, and maybe you'll find something new that speaks to you. It's good to stay open. Another common practice is of the mind is basic meditation, which it can be more than just calming. It can be, inspiring yourself and into your resting, learning to rest in this what's called the sky-like nature of mind, kind of like that beautiful expanse that was behind Will when he was speaking of the beautiful sunset. Learning to find that within and work with that. Other forms of practices of the mind can be, prayer, obviously, which can be many forms of prayer, supplication, aspiration, prayers of mercy, prayers of gratitude. And of course, other practices of the mind and what includes psychotherapy, individual and group. And but in the end, you just find the things that help you feel more at home in the world, so that you can, find the heart's rest, so to speak, so that you can find a certain sense of feeling sane and collected. It can take years. It can take years. You never really get over these losses. You mainly just you turn the volume down. You become more spacious around them. You learn to see through them. You learn to create new connections. But it's always there, and that's okay. That's that continuing bond. It's okay. It's part of what makes you a compassionate human being. And group therapy is so powerful for developing a sense of not just being in oneself, but seeing oneself and others, and getting larger than just you're trapped in your single, solitary, isolated self. But these are all ways of working, all forms of self-care. So that's about all I have to say. But the important is just to be creative and be kind to yourself, compassionate. Because if you're kind to yourself, then if you fall and freak out every once in a while, that's okay. You get back on the horse and it'll all work out. In the long run, you'll get back to your native mind. Okay. Thank you, Ken.
Much, Matt. That was incredible suggestions. We'd love to have some of that maybe accessible to people on our website. That's just an amazing compilation. Everyone really resonated with me. So thank you very much for that. I'd like to open it up for questions. Anyone out there who would like to pose an issue or a question or a suggestion? We have a question here. Now that my wife is gone, what are some suggestions for managing invitations from friends when I really don't feel like going out?
Well,
and this would be for both you, Matt, and for Will in that situation.
Will, why don't you take I've been speaking for a while. You please, Will.
Oh, I've been speaking for a while too. To this gentleman, I'd say it's the type of thing where if it were me, I would tell this person I'm just not up for it on this particular day. There are days that I've had that were full of activity and hiking and plentiful and the social, and there are days when I just want to listen to a sad song, and just being able to let that out based on the emotions I was feeling and connecting with a song that I heard when I was growing up, that I could envision my mother standing there, my parents. I allow, it's what you said, is be kind to yourself. Allow yourself the opportunity to not do that activity. Personally, would I not do any activity? No. That obviously you've seen that I don't. For me, I support doing something as a distraction. But no, if you just don't feel like it on a particular day, let them know. And the people who do understand will understand.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, have an exit strategy. If you go to a party, have a way to get home on your own. Just think, if it turns out not to have the right feeling for you, it's okay. You're in a tender place.
So it's not great to completely ignore social invitations, but it's also okay too, if the mood or the feeling just isn't there, to demur the invitation and do what feels right, really. I have another question here. It says, my wife dealt with so many daily tasks, from meals to bookkeeping. I sometimes feel completely overwhelmed. What do you suggest?
Matt, I'll turn
Well,
that to you.
You can turn it to me. Yeah, I mean, especially if you have children and you have to take care of children, and your wife is gone and you're grieving, that's a very tough combination. And I would call on help, family or friends that can help, especially with meals, preparing food for you or with you, and kind of just have to you have to reinvent yourself in a sense. If you weren't a cook before, you have to step up and become a bit of a cook. You may not be as good of a cook as your wife was, but you can find a way. There's always takeout here in New York City too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with what Matt said. I mean, grief, it's one of the things that I got to learn throughout this process is that people really don't know how much you're grieving. They don't know the levels of grief. And I found that some people tend to just shy away in certain situations. So it makes it harder for you to decide, who can I reach out to? Can I reach out to Ken? I'll call Ken. Hey, can you help me prepare this specialty recipe that you always do? So it's hard for you. And, I can't imagine the spot that you're in with children and having to do something. I've been trying for a few years to recreate my mother's fruitcake for the holidays. Not working. It's not very good at all. So, she did wonders, and I'm sure your wife did wonders also. So maybe you do become a cook. Maybe you find someone who you're concerned about bothering in that particular moment. Maybe this person is more than willing to give you some assistance. But sometimes you just have to ask. If you ask, you'll know.
We have another question here. Thank you, Will, for sharing your story. So challenging for you and your family. Matt, you spoke of returning to your native ways of coping as a way of helping with your grief. What if your past coping wasn't healthy, like drinking alcohol or engaging in risk-taking behavior?
That's an excellent question. Coping, it's good to look up, even in the wiki entry, coping mechanisms or defense mechanisms or adaptive mechanisms. They're both negative mechanisms, coping styles, and positive. So yeah, we need to be careful, especially of alcohol when we're grieving. I had a friend whose wife died, and he locked the liquor cabinet, literally. He went sober for half a year because he knew it was how dangerous it was for him. So yeah, we need to be aware of our negative coping strategies and find healthy coping strategies. And so if you're getting lost in cannabis or alcohol, obviously that's not healthy. Or if you're overeating, some people there have eating addictions, that's not healthy. So some people act out sexually, that's probably not a good idea. Driving recklessly, definitely not a good idea. But so yeah, just be honest with yourself. Your common sense will tell you what's right and what's not. And if you can't handle your cope, if you can't handle your negative coping mechanisms, seek help. Absolutely, find a therapist or a AA or a group, and seek help. So it's important. Yeah.
We have a question from Eric. Writes, what is the difference between complicated grief and normal grief? My wife passed in 2019 after a 5-year battle with lung cancer. We were together for 43 years. It's still very difficult. And he writes further, my original therapist retired and the current one isn't too helpful. So I guess the first question relates to the difference between complicated and normal grief.
Right. What they used to call complicated grief is well, technically there is the DSM definition that after a year, if you're still in the thick, but a lot of people disagree with that because it can take a few years, as we all know, to work through our heavy losses and hurts. There's no, it's hard to put a definition on it, but a lot of it may be if you weren't prone to depression earlier in your life and you're very sad to a point that you're having a hard time functioning, then you seek a therapist, and maybe you do have what complicated grief. It doesn't matter what they call it. What matters is that you get healed, and you know, you can use a little. Some people are prone to anxiety or depression when they're grieving, and it can spin out. That's certainly true. That's something we have to work with, and something you need professional help. And no, but if you can't, you should keep trying to find a therapist that you connect with. If you lost your therapist to 5 years, you have to keep looking. But yeah, it's hard, and it takes years to get over things. I don't like the term complicated grief too much. You know, there's another term for it now. It's all over the DSM-TR, and but it's just a way of pathologizing what in many ways is the normal grieving process, which is sadness. It often involves a lot of sadness. Yeah, and that's okay. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're just about out of time now. I'd like to thank our guests, Will Haywood and Matthew Morse. Most of all, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us tonight. Know that you're not alone. If you want any more information on tonight's points, please email us or check out our website at nationalwidowers.org, where you'll find many resources. And we invite you to join us on the fourth Wednesday of every month for our NWO workshops at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our topic next month will be, our April workshop will be Grief 101, What Just Happened. And if you have any suggestions for future workshops or any questions, please drop us a line at nationalwidowers.org or email us at info@nationalwidowers.org. I'm Ken Levy. Please take good care of yourself, and wishing you peace and strength. Good night.
Good night. Thank you, Ken.
Thanks, guys.